Hello. For many, it has long been a dream to see 40k on the big screen. A live action, big budget, blockbuster movie in 40k's universe. Now, there have been plenty of adaptations into video games, into animations, even an animated feature length movie. But that dream to see a live action adventure in the 41st millennium remains unrealised. Well, mostly. In the 90s, Games Workshop premiered a brand new short film set in the universe of Warhammer 40,000, directed by special effects maestro Tom Lauten and co-written by Lauten and Games Workshop's own Andy Jones. The film, called Inquisitor, would see live-action Space Marines face down traitor Marines and even a Chaos Juggernaut. What's more, the film was accompanied by 2 trailers, one featuring Terminators, a Magus, and a full-on Gene Stealer, whilst the others showed off several orcs in all their green glory. Tom Lauten joined me to talk about the creation of those films, how they were made, and how they even came to be made in the first place. We also explored some of Tom's wider career as well, including his work with Troma on films like the Toxic Avenger. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with director Tom Lauten. Tom, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to talk a bit about the creation of Inquisitor and all of that great work. I suppose the best place to start might be with your career and sort of how you got started in film.
Wow, yeah, that's. I think I've always had an interest in illusion since I was very very young, 4 or 5 years old. I remember TV shows appearing like The Magician with Bill Bixby and things like that, and the horror movies and whatnot. And my dad was a keen science fiction follower. He used to read science fiction, and I'd of course ask him, how did they do that? How is that possible? And he'd explain magic tricks, and he'd explain simple werewolf transformation from Lon Chaney era, and I started to understand these things as illusions and achievable illusions, things that you could actually do and show people and make and create a sense of wonder. And this was intoxicating. And it was at that point that I decided I wanted to be a magician. And of course, I got the stage magic kit and all that sort of thing and performed it in front of my classmates. It was terrible. This takes practice. This isn't going to do this. It's an illusion. It doesn't seem like magic to me, and I have to practice it. So that's rubbish. So I film magic came along, and I understood special effects. My father explained to me special effects, and I had the making of 2001: A Space Odyssey, the book, and of course I probably didn't understand half the text that was written in there, but it gave me a little look at behind the scenes. Star Trek was still popular in syndication, so there's special effects there, and I just started getting hooked into the idea of creating illusions, creating special effects, creating wonder where there is just a practical means to begin with, and then spinning that out into a sense of wonder, and that led to amateur filmmaking, Super 8 filmmaking. Luckily, again, my father was he was an avid camera collector. He collected antique and collectible cameras. So cameras pretty much from the beginning of photography at that time. And he was a big time dealer. So he would buy out these small camera shops and collectors, and there would be movie cameras and Graflex flash handles in there. Yeah, I had choice of those. And I said, this looks like a lightsaber. Ding. And so I had, regular 8 and 8mm wind up movie cameras and stuff. So that stuff was sitting in cardboard boxes. So the temptation was there. I thought, well, I want to do these special effects, and then I want to record them so I can look at them again and say all that effort was worth it, and see whether I got close to creating the sense of wonder from the illusions I was replicating or attempting to replicate. So that's kind of how I started out in filmmaking, special effects, illusion craft, for
Right.
lack of a better term. And it's always come full circle again. I ended up working with magicians and all that sort of stuff, and had great fun with illusion.
Amazing. Yeah, that's fascinating. I guess I never really thought about the because it is movie magic, isn't it? And
Yeah,
the creation of special effects. It is tricks, but in the in the really fun sense.
in a different context, tricks to promote a story or a wondrous idea.
Mm,
Special effects are for when the doing something practically is too expensive, too dangerous, or impossible.
mm,
So those are your parameters. That's where you start. That's where you start to say, okay, well, special effects are needed here. There was a creative talent challenge in doing that, in creating an illusion, and then the round of applause was the emotional response to something that people thought impossible, dangerous, or outrageously expensive to do. So
mm.
there's that challenge of can you make people go, huh? How did I just see that? And if you have an emotional content beyond that, if you could ooh, ah, oh, anything like that, that's the bonus if you can tap into that emotion as well.
Mm, yeah. And you find yourself working on films like Toxic Avenger and as one of the Critters films, right? I mean, what were
Yeah,
those
yeah.
experiences like moving into the industry?
Toxic Avenger. Wow. Troma used to have a T-shirt that said Troma 13 years of movie making experience. I remember at the time. And we used to say Troma 1 year of movie making experience 13 times. It was low budget. It was make it up as you go along. It was spend as little money as possible and turn out product. It was cutthroat, brutal, brutal. I found them brutal people to work for.
Right.
You'd get little comments like, "I was wondering how long it was going to take before they left." These they could be very cruel people. They could be very funny people. I've had it out with members of Troma in alleyways in New York. Little quip, little attacks, little snipes, because it was all sort of seat of the pants filmmaking. It was non-union. We could tell because they'd every once in a while we'd find wheel nuts taken off the wheels of the transport vehicle. So we're reminded it was non-union, and they were going to stick to that. New York in the early '80s filmmaking, combat filmmaking. It was bizarre. Troma was bizarre. The entire production company was set in a Troma was set in a West Side walk-up, right near where the old Madison Square Garden used to be in Manhattan. And there was a huge parking lot across the street from Troma, huge empty parking lot. I think it was part of the whole old Madison Square Garden thing. And it was in West Side Storyland. I mean, that's the kind of building it was in. And it was everything you'd think of a inexpensive walk-up building owned by a company making low-budget films.
Right.
We lived there. We produced the film out of there. It was a DOS house. It was Combat Central, and it was a very strange. Each crew from a Troma film kind of takes on a life of its own, and it's a bit of the sort of kids on an island trying to survive. What's the famous story? The
Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. It was like Lord of the Flies for filmmakers.
Right.
We had very little input. We had to survive. We had to eat. There was no food. There was no pay, so there was no food. We'd get promotional items in, pop noodle type things, or frozen yogurt desserts. Somebody would get in trade for a promotional credit. So we'd end up eating those just to survive. Don't eat those; those are for the shoot,
Right.
And it was like that, and then of course getting up to hijinks late at night, like dumping blood out the window onto the sidewalk below, huge blood splatter, and then I went down there and I drew a body outline except for the head. wrote some chalk numbers on it to make it look official. And then we went back upstairs in the fire escape and started watching. People would wander down. This drunk guy wandered down. He looked down at it. He went, "Whoa!" then he went, "Whoa!" He looked up to see we're hiding. We threw a dummy head out into what was it, Ninth Avenue,
Right.
filled with blood, and we threw it out there. We shouldn't have, but we did. And vehicles were swerving around. The only one that hit it was an ambulance.
Gosh. Man, I mean that's
so it was weird. It was kind of like that independent filmmaker adventure that you kind of want, but in a way it was kind of good because it was so exploited. So exploited. It gives you stories for years to dine out on. I can dine out on these stories about Troma and the stuff we put up with or did or had no choice about for years. That's to the end of my life. I have stories from Troma. Extraordinary things. Yeah. It's how they are still going and how they've managed to keep going. I don't know. But yeah. 1 year of movie making experience 13 times at the time. I'm sure they've gotten much better now.
So were you, because I'm curious then, obviously you then intersected with Warhammer later on. Were you a Warhammer fan? Were you playing the games?
No, I used to
way?
play Dungeons and Dragons back in the day,
Right.
like every good American kid did. In my early to probably mid-teen years, in high school, and I found my people, and I used to belong to the SCA, the Society for Creative Anachronisms. It's kind of medieval Renaissance, nebulous, oldie-timey recreation society. So we do full contact sword fighting and stuff like that with rattan swords, bamboo rattan swords. And I got into all that stuff. So there was like a bit of cosplay type stuff there. Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Started going to conventions through friends who went to conventions and entering pieces into art contests. So I came at sort of high concept media that way. And it really wasn't until I had moved to the UK in the late 80s and then going into the early 90s that I started encountering Games Workshop. I think it wasn't too many years before they went public that I encountered them. So they were pretty advanced with their stuff and their artwork and all that. So it was a good time. I don't remember whether I just simply noticed them because I lived in Coventry at the time.
Right.
And there was a Games Workshop in just about every major town and city in Britain at the time. And I might have gone in there and started talking about stuff to them there and said, "Oh, is there a head office I could call?" And things went that way. And I ended up contacting them. And they said, "Oh, what sort of stuff do you do?" And I said, "Like what you guys produce, but in real life. That's the kind of thing that I aspire to do." And they went, And we started talking and we came up with some ideas of some things that could be produced for them that would help them with their promotions.
Right. So that's where it sort of started the ball rolling. It was literally you calling up and saying,
"Hi, I do special effects. You guys have things that would be fun to do in special effects.
Right.
Should we do some special effects?" And they went, and my main contact there was Andy Jones, who I have all the time in the world for. He's a great guy, a very creative, very funny person, very much my sense of humor. And we'd get together and start talking blue skying ideas. What could we do? They Games Workshop were very adventurous with their marketing. They wanted to get people's attention. I think they wanted to exploit, and I certainly know Andy did. He wanted to exploit the popularity of high concept films and stuff and say, let's plug Games Workshop into that because we've got a really lively fantasy worlds, and they had fantastic artists, and people like Mark Gibbons, who's a longtime friend, working for Games Workshop, and he would just crank out stuff to me that looked like concept art from films. I just thought these guys just turn this stuff out, and they're perfectly happy to pull some of the cool stuff into their world and have me make a prop or something. And they're really open with that kind of thing, and they liked the idea that I enjoyed the design concepts and the aesthetic of Warhammer 40,000. That was the one that we really approached first. And it was exciting to be able to talk to concept artists and say, what if we had a backpack that was this kind of thing? And Mark would just do a sketch and send it along. As, oh, I've got a production designer here. He was busy with plenty of other stuff, but yeah, it was kind of like having production designers on tap. And you could go in, and I used to go to Games Workshop when they were just below Nottingham Castle. And it was just filled with artwork, filled with miniatures, and filled with people who were more than happy to talk aesthetics and design about this stuff. And with Andy, conceptual stuff about their universe, their world. And it was like talking to somebody, it's like talking to Frank Herbert as he was coming up with ideas for Dune. It was that kind of big. And it was that an open conceptual universe. And I got really intrigued by that. I really got drawn in by this thousands of years old antique, but thousands of years old universe, this anachronistic design style, this brutalist stuff, this Gothic architecture, but it's set in space, and spaceships look like cathedrals. And it's like, wow, this is so cool. And the body politic being religious, but scientific. But science is so old, they've forgotten what science is. So it's the religious side of it that persists, and their engineers and their mechanics are as much about the religion and the spiritual belief as putting nuts and bolts together. I loved that mix. And I think, it started showing up in things like Fallout. You've got the different strains of society, mechanistic companies and stuff like that, and they've now got occults that follow mechanisms and devices, and you have other ones that follow genetics, and all these things have turned into almost a religious type body. And Games Workshop did that with Warhammer 40,000 back in the 80s, and this was just such an exciting idea for me.
Yeah.
So I absolutely sunk into it. And Andy and I used to talk for hours. I'd go up there and we'd hang out, and we'd go all day, lunch, or he'd come down to us, and he was like walking to Sounders Workshop, and we could show him ideas. And what if we did this and added these things here and built this into a gigantic arm that came up? And he would get excited, and he would, get stuck into that. And that's when after we did some short films, it was the first stuff we did. I produced some small models for them for the gaming, and said, well, let's produce some short film stuff and just do little vignettes, just little enough that you could maybe put together a trailer that would suggest a storyline. So we started planning around that, and I had a 16 millimeter film camera. Some of the first stuff we shot was on film. It wasn't on video. It was on film. I'd never shot 16 millimeter film before. And so I got a camera, and I got a book, and I started learning. I got a light meter, and I learned how to do it. And by the time we were ready to film, I knew how to shoot 16 mil film. And luckily, every shot came out. The exposures and everything. I was, praying, please let me have got this right. And so it was a fantastic learning curve. I got to shoot motion picture film, with my own camera, and get the lenses I wanted, and do miniatures, so it was creatively. It was wow. This is like somebody handed me this open book and said, "You write it. What do you want to do?" So we started playing with some of the costume designs and some of the rules and regulations of, you do this with Warhammer 40,000. You never do this kind of thing. The body politic making sure we got in there, we understood who the good guys were, who the bad guys were, and what it meant to be a good guy and bad guy. And started getting into that. And I thought, wow, let's start making these costumes work for this. And these are cults, and these are religious groups. These are, so it started dripping with detail that I really, really got into. So we shot a bit of that footage. And then my company, Bright Light Studios at the time, we expanded a little bit, and Games Workshop went, this stuff's pretty cool. We did a little convention thing with some short films. And then Andy and I started discussing, well, what if we did a short story? Do we have any types of characters that would allow us to have an independent character that wasn't reliant upon, a troupe of people in costumes and machinery? So Andy suggested an Inquisitor, because an Inquisitor is a kind of an independent agent who can bring to bear almost any technology, anything from the political side or the resource side, and bring it to bear on a problem. It's kind of a Sherlock Holmes type character. So that was where the idea of having an Inquisitor and basing a short story around this more flexible character. And we could have him touch upon things like joining Space Marines or on a command ship and things like that. So we knew we could have him bump up against things and show a bit of the bigger world, but then return back to a more singular story.
Right. Great. Yeah. So those earlier shorts, were they the same ones that ended up being sort of packaged at the end of the Inquisitors? That was the
yeah.
Right.
They in later years, I think certainly at first we did. I don't even know that there was much of a title or a sort of a goal behind it. There was one that was going to be Gene Stealers, Hive City,
Sure.
Gene Stealer Mages, things like that. Wow,
Yeah.
I remembered the name of that. Gene Stealer Mages. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one was called, at least in the release that sort of ultimately happened, that was called Hive Infestation.
There you go.
Yeah, you had your Gene Stealer Magus, and the Terminators were turning up to deal with the Gene Stealer in that one.
All shot in our local college basement.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. Any place with pipes and hallways and anything like that. Yep. That's the place. That's where we're going. So we had run of this local college, university, polytechnic, I guess it was at the time, basement, and that's where we shot. I think we shot most of that stuff in a day.
Right.
And then something I keep doing. It was around June, and I don't remember the year. It must have been 90, something like that, 91 maybe. We decided to do a night shoot in the industrial unit where our workshop was set. And it had those northern lights. I don't know if you've ever seen them, these peaked roofs you see on these buildings, short peak, and they have glass panels in there so you could get daylight in.
Sure.
I don't know why I've done it so many times. June 21st is when I decided to shoot the night shoots.
Right.
The longest day of the year.
Right.
But nonetheless, so in we went, waiting for it to get dark, which was about, I don't know, 3 a.m. It seemed like. It just would stay light forever. So we're shooting stuff there. We shot that was our non-basement shoot, was in the hallways of our workshops around there. So we had control, we had access, and that's where we shot in the half light. And we did our orc stuff there. So we did all the Gene Stealer stuff in the basement, all the orc stuff in our workshop hallways, and chucked in a Chaos Marine and chucked in a couple of other things. Some stuff in our workshop, of our Gene Stealer Magus made up as an Inquisitor at the time. What I knew about it, pounding on the table saying, "We must destroy our enemies." All shot in our little workshop that we had. Right. So it was bubblegum baling twine, very ambitious. We had little blasters, our little bolters with gas chambers in them. We had gas bottles in them and pilot lights and electronic ignitions. We're trying to get flames coming out of guns.
Right.
It was very ambitious, and I think Games Workshop liked the idea that we're going for it.
Yeah.
with what we had, which was all in camera at the time. There was
Sure,
no
right.
digital effects to speak of at the time. It was in its very, very early years.
Well, I was going to
So
ask about the actual like technologies you were using. So obviously there's the Gene Stealer itself, which is briefly present. There's a
yeah,
Tyranid Warrior at the end as well that
yeah,
you sort of get
yes,
a brief glimpse of, and the Terminators. The big
yeah.
sort of hulking suits. I mean, how were you constructing those costumes? What were you using?
Well, the Gene Stealers. Let's see what there was a it was a sculpted mask. So on a life cast head and shoulders, and we'd sculpt a mask, make a mold of that. So that's our starting point. We know we have those. We know we'll make up some claws and sculpt those, and then I think we started assembling it basically on somebody. Started assembling foam sheets and gluing them together on people and trimming them and latex and tissue over that, and started building up this padded assembly of a body shape,
Mm.
and then started gluing on claws and stuff like that. So we built up a suit for this creature, as much as we did. I think it was only from like the waist up or something
Mm.
like that. We sometimes treated it like a puppet, would puppet if we had to, if we couldn't get somebody in the shot. The big Gene Stealer thing, that was a puppet constructed by one of the guys. It's like, can I do that? Yep, go ahead, go for it. Let's do it. We got lots of stuff to turn out. The Terminator Marines, they were a real challenge because, of course, they were huge by comparison to the human body. So I started with something that I remember using in the past. It was a backpack. And they used to be able to get like backpacks that were like a bag on a frame, on an aluminum frame or aluminum frame. And they have straps on, but you could strap them on, and you had a metal framework which you could start bolting and gluing things onto, that somebody didn't have to hold with their hands, so it was attached to their torso. So that seemed like a logical starting point. I used that on on something that I did for TV in the States, and it was for Pee Wee's Playhouse.
Right.
And if you remember that show
With the Pee Wee Herman.
with Pee Wee Herman, yeah.
Right, sure, yeah.
And they shot that in New York at a company that I used to do a lot of commercial work for. So I'd make animation models and stuff like that for this company. And then Paul Rubens came in with Pee Wee's Playhouse, and we geared up for that. And I made a thing called Roger the Monster. It was designed by, I can't remember his name at the moment, shameful, by an artist designer at the time, very trendy, and to this day still a well-renowned artist, modern artist. And he designed these kind of Big Daddy Roth style monsters and stuff for Pee Wee's Playhouse. And one of them was Roger the Monster, which is a big eyeball on a single foot with a mouth on either side, tentacles. So backpack frame, fiberglass eye, made that. And I thought, with the Terminator, this is perfect for this. We model made a big suit using measurements and stuff that we knew somebody would fit in, made a mold of that, and cast it in fiberglass. So we had a fiberglass shell of the basic shape of the body, and that could go on a backpack frame. Then we had somebody wearing that, and we started measuring for shoulder pads and what we could get away with in terms of building out without leaving somebody's legs sticking out the bottom like a matchstick, because you had to proportion it to a human proportion and still have it look feasible. So you couldn't have legs that were set 3 feet apart at the groin.
Sure.
You can't have that. We've got that sort of thing. So you have to make that work, even though the hips want to look really wide by comparison.
Sure.
So there's all this illusion of proportions and stuff, and we worked all that out. And sometimes it was cardboard with fiberglass over. Other times it was a sculpture and a mold and castings, and it was whatever means could get us to the end. And we wanted a full-size Terminator, full body shot, so our big reveal, he comes walking out, and we had some actors who did a pretty good job working with this ridiculous refrigerator of plastic they had to wear. And
was it heavy? Like, obviously bulky.
Heavy enough, and bulky. It was more awkward than heavy, because the backpack frame, the waist strap and the shoulder straps, it kind of evened out the distribution of the weight reasonably well. That we then have to put a helmet on them sometimes, but their faces didn't even touch the suit there. They just stuck out through a hole. So we'd have to put this helmet over it like a lid. So we're just being boxed in more and bolted into this thing more and more. You just hear this disembodied voice coming from inside. So, yeah, doing fine. I can almost breathe. And send a bit of water through the side, on a straw, and hope that they could drink. And we had boots on them, and we even had like big power hands, with pull rings and strings inside. So when they pulled these pull rings, and the fingers on this mechanical claw would open and close. And
right.
So we gave them a lot to do. Give them weapons that they put their arm in, and they'd have to carry those around. So they couldn't see anything. They were like wandering around in a giant cardboard box in a dusty hallway below a college. Trying to be spacemen. I'm going, no, you have to feel your age. You have to feel the importance of your clan, of your. I'm walking around in a cardboard suit, man. I don't know what's going on. So it was challenging to try to bring in a bit of mystique there to try to get some sort of performance out. It was really ambitious. It was, no one had ever done anything before. At the time, Games Workshop had one commercial, and it was really based on their much older design work, some of their first stuff, and they had Marines with these kind of pointed masks and stuff like that, really odd, relatively oddball designs,
right?
And they had stuff from that era, and they shot some commercial, and it was done very much in the style of the 80s, very sort of flashy, space, pew, 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 that kind of thing.
Would that have been for Space Crusade, or was it something else? Do you remember?
I don't know. It was I don't know whether it was more of a generalized Warhammer 40,000 commercial to kind of try to introduce people to it. I can't remember what the actual product was, but it was their very first attempt at it. And they liked the idea that it could be presented as 40K. But it wasn't Warhammer 40,000. And this was our attempt to get much closer to the ethos, to the design style and the world and the atmosphere that they created.
Sure.
It was an ambitious attempt with all that footage. And
sure. Well, yeah, ambition's right, because I mean, you had, like you've mentioned, orcs as well, and the Chaos Space Marine in the Blood for the Blood God short, the sort of trailer for that one. I mean, you were like exploring a lot of different like creatures and the inhabitants of the world.
We didn't even get into the fantasy stuff because we knew that was a whole other kettle of ball game. It was like a completely different thing altogether, although there were commonalities. So it was easier to stick to the sci-fi stuff to begin with, and because it relied on more mechanical kit and props that we could make that weren't so, they were more unique. The Games Workshop Warhammer World, the medieval sword and sorcery fantasy world, it's more similar to a lot of other products that were out there. The set in the far distant future, to the point where we are ancient history now to them. They don't even know about us. It's so far in the future.
Yeah.
Much more intriguing idea. It drew on kind of steampunk ethics, ethos, and concept of this futuristic antique feel to things, and it predated all that stuff. And I think that's what excited me about it is that sort of let's make things look futuristic but old, but we haven't even gotten to their old yet.
Sure.
And it's just all of that was like, wow. So we can use stuff that we consider old-fashioned to create futuristic technology that they consider old. So we're kind of using the old-fashioned concept, but making futuristic stuff with it. And it was just like, wow, this is fun. So the stuff that people enjoy with steampunk, the pressure valves and the exposed joints and steam valves and all this sort of stuff to make up a big machine, a complex looking machine. We got to start to play with that stuff before steampunk was a thing.
Hmm.
So we had backpacks with just that, copper pipes and condenser coils and all this old tech looking stuff in there, in this insane looking high tech backpack. And we did a lot of display models for Games Workshop like that, where we showed people the insides and the workings of some of these mechanisms. And that was just crazy creativity. We could just do whatever we wanted. The cooler, the better. And what an opportunity! As model makers and effects people, to just say, just make it as cool as you possibly can, and make it as detailed as you can. If you can think of it, go for it.
Sure.
You could do a cross section of a shell and make sure that the gunpowder has the right texture to it, and the primers are right, and you color the cross section so it looks like something out of an Imperial War Museum. Yeah, wow, what great fun. Do a Gene Stealer skull and cast it in a translucent resin and use dental acrylic for the teeth, and then age that and then yellow it, and then carve into it with a Dremel, grind in a serial number, and then put a tag on there with copper wire and twist it. All these things that you'd expect to see from a Victorian museum, all these kind of cataloging things. We got to do whatever we wanted with that, because it just added to this sense of dripping detail. And why would they create a catalog number on a plastic skull if it weren't real?
Hmm.
So once again, there's that illusion. Make people think there's a lot more thought involved than there is.
Yeah, because all
That's
of that stuff they were like created for Warhammer World, weren't they? Some of those displays and some of those like
very much so. Yeah,
yeah.
we created we had a couple of years where we did stuff for Games Workshop where we would have a set menu of display cabinets to do. So we do a Terminator Marine helmet with a video sight that goes to a pistol that's in the same case. So where the pistol is looking, you can look inside the Terminator Marine mask, which all had padding and wires and all this cool stuff. And there's a little video screen over the eye, and you could see where the gun was pointing. So we set that up as a display. So the kids are looking at this, and they're putting their hand in front of the gun, and they can see inside the Terminator mask. You can see their hand moving. So it's like a targeting computer and all this kind of stuff. We had so many projects like that where we could do that. We could make Tyranid weapons that looked like bioweapons. So there's these chambers that had organic-y looking stuff in it, and that kind of went into a magazine. And we could reinterpret technology like weapons and stuff like that for a biological point, origin point for the technology. It just was creatively, it was fantastic, and their designs were so good. We'd sort of say, well, let's make a Tyranid weapon. Well, which design do we like? And you could go through their catalog and sort of say, well, that's really cool. Marketer or somebody did, a bit of artwork. Oh, I like their take on that, and get permission and make it like that. And then they just say, go for it. We had bolters, marine weapons that were plated in silver. So we do a full size bolter and model make it so it looked like panels were off the side, and there was a chassis with cover panels that went on, and we'd make fake mechanisms to go inside it. And then we'd have all the plating and everything brought to somebody who had a workshop in the same group of workshops where we had ours. And he did silver plating. So we'd have him silver plate all the panels for the bolters. So they were heavily silver plated. I mean, you could cut yourself on their plating if it peeled up. It was so heavy. And then we would tarnish that and age it in a way that silver would age. So everything just had this feeling of age and respect. These things you should hold them up and you should hear angelic voices go, oh, as you held these things up. That was the feel they wanted. So we could really go to town on that. And we did all sorts of displays. We did huge playing terrains. We did these props. We ended up doing some Warhammer stuff where had a lizard man's head on a table as if it was being dissected by some cleric or something, who would handle biology. It was these turned ivory dissecting tools and all this sort of stuff, and bottles filled with mysterious lumps of things floating in liquid. And we got to do all that kind of sword and sorcery stuff as well on a few of those displays. So they were great fun.
Yeah, they're amazing. I remember that one was in White Dwarf as well, I think.
Was it?
The
Yeah.
man desk. Yeah, really
Yeah.
great stuff.
Well, it was great. We could go to the nth degree with it. So it really was terrific creativity. Um, and yeah, I look back on that stuff very fondly, because just whatever ideas we had, if they were cool, we could run with them. It was
Yeah,
terrific
that's
fun.
fantastic. I mean, do you remember any? Obviously, you mentioned working with Andy on Inquisitor, and we can come back around to the movie. But
Sure.
just in that sort of space, were you working with anyone else from Games Workshop, or who went on to work with Games Workshop?
Andy was pretty much my contact there. We certainly knew all the other people, and knew them by name, and go up and visit and spend days and different chats with people. Names are going to escape me at the moment.
Sure.
But even some one of my guys that worked for me at the time, he went on to work with Games Workshop, and and was involved in model making and things like that. And the skills transferred. I grabbed these people from Games Workshop, from the stores. Do you have any good model makers that come here? Yeah, we got this guy and this guy, and then a couple of them end up going to Games Workshop after Bright Light Studios was done. And we'd done our stuff for them. So it was good. We knew a lot of the people there, and saw different products come out, and different artworks evolve, and different design styles come in. So
sure,
it was terrific. It was a very open area. If we wanted to discuss things with artists and whatnot, there was no problem. Just call up and have a chat with them, or stop in and see them when you go up there. It was only a couple hours away from where our workshops were, so it wasn't that difficult to go and see them.
right. Yeah, because I saw in the credits to Inquisitor, Jez Goodwin is mentioned, obviously, and his sort of design concepts and things like that. I think Mark
Yes.
Bedford was credited as well as one of
Mark
the
Bedford. Yeah. Mark. He started out as a recommendation for the local Games Workshop shop,
Right.
and then he ended up being one of my right hand men on that. And yeah, then he went on to work for Games Workshop itself. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, Jez was great. He was always good fun, and just mention anything to. I could see your cat there.
Yeah, she likes to come in at least once. She likes to come into every interview and just say hello.
Yeah, Jez Goodwin was fantastic. Oh, what a skill! What a creative mind! I mean, you just turn him on, and drawings start coming out. Designs and sculptures and stuff. So always enthusiastic, 100% enthusiastic. Him, Mark Gibbons and people like that. John, one of their main artists. I can't remember.
John Blanche.
John
Blanche.
Yes.
Yeah.
John Blanche, of course, yes. The gentle giant. Yeah, he was great. He was kind of in a way, their art director. As an artist, he kind of floated, and he would advise other people and try to keep the ethos, in his head, and but still maintain his style. It was great. What a great place. They exploited artists in many good ways, all the ways that artists like to be. Bring something to it of yourself, but kind of stick to this area. And it must have been really a creative time for them as well. If it was anything like what we went through, it was really fun.
And yeah, you mentioned Andy Jones and working with him, because you co-wrote what would be the Inquisitor short film together, right?
Yeah. I mean, we knew what it was. We knew it was it was a modest attempt at a 40K story. We knew we had limited abilities. Computer animation and stuff like that at the time was still rudimentary. So the idea of utilizing it for a realistic, photorealistic production was ambitious. So we were all aware that that's we were attempting champagne ideas with beer money and resources. It wasn't so much the money; it was just the resources, the logistical resources. It's a very, very difficult thing to isolate areas and people and create a whole new world from scratch. And you can use nothing from the real world, because it just wouldn't fit. It would jar. So you have to build an entire universe from the ground up. The most you can show is maybe a floor, and everything else has to be considered and made. So we knew it was ambitious, but yeah, we had to. We absolutely had to.
Hmm.
Here's an opportunity here to begin to see characters come to life a little bit, you know. And so, yeah, we started out. We had a lot of laughs doing it, coming up with ridiculous ideas, of course, to amuse ourselves, and then hone it back down to, what would work within the 40K universe and what we think we could tell story wise to play with some of these ideas and concepts.
Hmm. So there's a sort of rumor online that the Inquisitor was created almost as a pitch for a feature-length movie, so that it was proving the case for we can make
Yeah,
40K move.
it was. I mean, I think some people saw it as an approach to a proof of concept, and yeah, I don't think it wasn't formalized in that way because we all knew that you can tell any story, and I was utterly convinced that Games Workshop's world and universe that they created would translate really well to film. It had certainly had all the visual stuff, but I thought it had some meat on the bones in terms of stories and depth of stories and characters and a sense of history and timelessness and scale. I thought all that stuff could translate really well. There was talk at one point of a feature film. There were rights that were knocking around.
Right.
There were story ideas that were story idea and ideas that were knocking around that would make an interesting start on turning 40K into a media product.
Right.
And started working on some of the designs for that. There were people involved who had legal ability to look at that stuff and start playing with those ideas. In film terms, they call it an option.
Right.
And I believe an option existed at one point, and I certainly was involved in throwing ideas around to those people and to Games Workshop generally. Games Workshop wanted the people with the option to look at it. They didn't want to have to think about all that sort of stuff, but I still would run stuff by them for approval to make sure that anything that I passed on to people with options was in the ballpark of what they might expect. But yeah, there was no hard and fast plan at all
Right.
to make anything more of Inquisitor other than what it was, which is something for showing at Games Day and various events, releasing maybe on video and just sort of saying, here's our favorite games world realized in real life to some degree anyway. And it was an experiment. It was a proof of concept. This stuff was an opportunity for Games Workshop to put their design ethos and their story ideas and their characters on screen in a different medium for the first time. So it was a worthwhile experiment. It was very ambitious, but everything 40K is ambitious, isn't it? It's a big crazy creative world.
Yeah.
So yeah, there were no hard and fast plans. It wasn't like on a knife's edge of this is going to be an amazing movie in 1 second, and then it didn't happen. There was nothing like that. It was rumblings and ideas and talks and stuff like that. But yeah, there was talk of film work, of course, back then. As soon as a camera was pointed at any of this stuff, and people went, "This might make a good movie." Andy was saying that the moment he first heard about Games Workshop, I'm sure.
Yeah.
He's a guy with ambitious ideas, always has been, and very, very creative man.
And then you, in a year or so after the Inquisitor came out, you then were working on the Final Liberation video game as well, right?
Yeah. So in a way, I guess proof of concept worked. They could see that you could put people in suits. You could get an interpretation of this stuff and do that. And yeah, who was it? I don't want to say it wasn't Electronic Arts.
Yeah, it eludes me as well for the
Yeah,
moment.
the the publishers of the games sort of approached Games Workshop, and I assume licenses were sorted out, and yeah, some scripting came through for Final Liberation, and there were cut sequences that needed to happen, and I don't remember exactly where the scripting for all that stuff came from. I know I had a lot to do with it. I think there were just some generalized scripting needs for the cut sequences that would get you into a sequence and get you out of a sequence. And depending upon whether you achieved what you wanted to set out or were supposed to set out to do or not, there were outs from that chunk of gameplay. Success, great. Let's move on and kill more of the bad guys, or oh, we're taking hits, we're going to be in trouble. So there was all that stuff for these scenes, but within that, it allowed us to craft different characters and run with the Warhammer 40,000 stuff, and the gameplay was so impersonal insofar as it was more of a strategy type game. So there weren't a sense of characters within the actual gameplay. All that sense of character, all that color commentary and mood came from the cut sequences or animation sequences. So we still had a lot of scope to create the kind of world that we were imagining in our heads. We had a lot of latitude with that. We had some great actors that I had used in other projects, and we got some good performances. Tongue in cheek, a bit sort of not kitsch, but laying it on pretty heavy. Within the style of that kind of movie. So yeah, we definitely went a lot more theatrical and a lot more ambitious with the cut sequences for those games. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, the ambition of just even like you said, the scope and the scale. There's so many different setups and characters, and you're exploring so many different aspects of the Imperial Guard, for instance, and you
Yeah.
see all these different people from across the armies. So it's, I imagine quite a big undertaking just getting everything together to
Oh
create
yeah.
that.
Yeah, and part of it was, we'd have milestones we'd have to make. So we'd have all the props and costumes and all that, and we'd have to photograph all those just to make milestones. So we were filling up rolls and rolls of films of just cataloging all the things that we had made for all these sequences. I remember doing that one day, and we just had our workshops opened out to the air, and it would look like a yard sale of props and stuff. It was just lying all over the car park, and we're just getting people in costumes and photographing, and those were then sent off for approval, so we could move on to the next phase of producing all this stuff. Yeah, we built our own blue screen stage. We rented a new unit. Specifically, it used to be a place that repaired and set up compressors for workshops, air supplies and stuff like that. So it was this greasy, mucky place. And we had to have the whole place steam cleaned to begin with. We just had this high pressure steam cleaning company come in there and hose the thing down from ceiling to floor. And then it took about 3 weeks for the whole place to dry out. And then we had a nice clean place that we could build up blue screens, lighting rigs, and all. So we built all that. We built our own blue screen. We completed the curved section down at the floor, so it looked like there was no edge to it. And we made our own lights. I was buying flood lamps, 300-watt flood lamps that you could just get from B&Q, and taking the glass out and having the glass shot blasted so it was a soft light, so it would light the blue screen evenly. We constructed everything. We had to shoot audio, with audio dialogue. So we had to soundproof the whole place. So we bought, I don't know, a gross of packing blankets, and all those were then attached to the walls. So the walls were deadened, so we didn't get echoes in there.
Mm.
We had to build an entire studio to then be able to shoot some of these larger scenes, these blue screen shots and stuff like that for the CD-ROM based games.
Yeah.
And it was tremendously ambitious and terrific fun. Yeah, and just towards the end of it, a couple of units down, there was a workshop that dealt with cars, and it caught fire.
Oh no.
And that was nice. That was a nervous day, as
Sure.
the entire building was filling with smoke, and we're thinking, are we even going to be able to deal with these costumes after the smoke damage? And
Right.
yeah, there was some dramas here and there. But yeah, we had a full production facility there. We shot everything, practically everything on blue screen.
Right.
About the only thing we didn't shoot on blue screen were the Imperial troops that were under attack in a trench system,
Right.
and that was all shot just with in a darkened room because it was night. And again, all in camera effects except for the occasional laser shots. We were throwing dirt in the air and turning on lights for blasts and things like it, shaking the camera. So it's very old school filmmaking, and then it was high tech stuff. And we had our own CG department in house. One of our guys, he specialized in digital stuff. That's what he did. And I brought him on to handle our digital effects, and we practically made our own editing systems to edit these things. It was that early days. There weren't a lot of nonlinear systems, a lot of computer-based editing systems. So we had to created some of our own digital effects stuff, and we created our own editing facilities and our own production facilities for this sort of thing.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was very creative times.
It sounds like it. Yeah, really important sort of part of your career's journey, I suppose. Like the time you spent in the 40K universe.
Yeah, it was a really creative time. I think this was either just before or just after Games Workshop was floated as a public company. Stocks and all that stuff on the. It was very ambitious material. Full stop. There were strangely enough, we were watching some documentaries on computer games and stuff. And, the 90s, when a lot of your CD based systems were coming out and full motion video was being used. And we were very aware of some of the awful ways it was being used. Very, very regurgitated exposition, just somebody, barely acting in front of a camera, talking about stuff they didn't believe or didn't fully understand. And it was very wooden, and it looked very much like an intro sequence for a gameplay. We wanted to try to do something more ambitious than that. We really wanted it to feel cinematic as much as we could. But we had to handle it like a TV show because we're cranking through so much material. The shoots and stuff were so intense. There was so much stuff to do. We were, because we were doing digital backgrounds and things like that, we tried to dummy up what the shots were going to look like ahead of time. So even filming somebody in front of a blue screen, we'd still have temporary backgrounds we'd put behind them to try to get an idea of what the shot was like.
Right.
And we went on with other productions for other products to take advantage of that experience. And we started becoming a decent production company for CD-ROM games with a lot of full motion video content. We did a game called Realms of the Haunting in the mid 90s, and that was a huge project. I can't remember how many CDs the game covered. It's probably 4 or 5 CDs involved in the game. There's over 2 hours of live action footage.
Wow.
That we shot in a single summer, in a blue screen, a small blue screen. So we were trying to do some very ambitious stuff for computer games at the time to try to bring more cinematic realism and style to it.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, are there any stories that you would have loved to have been able to tell in 40K?
Oh gosh, yeah. Origin stories are always good. Dangerous territory,
Mm.
obviously, but the whole concept of this uh, undying emperor of Warhammer 40,000, this kind of cursed individual who has, you know, perpetual life, but everything awful that comes with that, and tremendous power, and this kind of insane level of power and religious position. I would have loved to explore that,
Mm.
and you know the bad guys, how the bad guys came about, how the initial sins created, you know, carried out by the bad guys against the emperor and all that. I would have loved to have looked at the drama, the big drama of all of that, and very very similar to Foundation, Asimov's Foundation,
Right.
and you know that's been done on video, and they're looking at this history and this body politic that is more profound than the lengths of time that they've been around for, you know, to the point where it affects the culture so deeply.
Mm.
The scale and the distances and the power and the might of that un, untouchable power that these characters have and wield. I love that stuff because it starts suggesting a whole culture that we can't even imagine. You know, with its priorities are different, and its rules are different, and its aesthetics are different. I love that kind of big, weird, unknown territory type story.
Mm.
So I would have loved to have done, you know, the things like the Horus heresy from, you know, the great sin committed upon the emperor and all that kind of stuff. I love that kind of thing because then when you show the aftermath of that, say many generations afterwards and many scientific advances afterwards, you can expand that original drama into this enormous universe that is rich with detail that even the participants in the original drama probably wouldn't recognize.
Mm.
It's evolved. Their entire world has evolved from these dramatic moments. I like playing with that stuff and seeing what cultures and reasons for things, you know, come about. So when you look at a prop and it's got this decoration on it and this bit on it, well, why? Well, that reflects back upon this part of the story. I love putting in those kind of details.
Mm.
I like that dripping with detail to the point where you think there must be a big complex story behind this.
Sure.
Andy and I used to talk about that all the time, of how to create a a detail or a something within a production that suggests there's so much further detail and documentation and rich understanding behind it. It's creating the illusion that that exists. When people say, well, show us what you got, and you go, I don't know, it's just this drawing. But we drew it in a way that would suggest there's way more information behind it than that. I love that, especially if you can get that implied information to logically work out. So as people start digging into it, they go, oh my gosh, it does lead to there. And it does. And creating just enough surface that the amount that people dig into it suggests an awful lot more, but there is nothing else there. That's the kind of cheeky laugh you get to have. You know, people go, in this scene when this person came down and they asked this person what this was about, and he just gives them this look, and you know there's a whole lot going on, and you go, no, there's nothing going. They're wondering what they're having for lunch. But I'm so glad you got that feeling from that, because that's the feeling we wanted to give you.
Mm.
But and a lot of times people do this with films. They say, well, what was your motivation? What was your idea behind this scene? And they've clearly overthought it quite a bit, you know, and I get that. They're passionate and they see something that they like. And I had this, I did a weekend with Freddie Francis, the cinematographer, Freddie Francis. And this was in the old Central TV studios in Birmingham in England. And there was an opportunity, this guy who shot The Elephant Man, amongst many other films that he photographed. But David Lynch directing, he shot The Elephant Man. And there were a lot of film students at this event with Freddie, a workshop with Freddie Francis. And you could tell they're very earnest and very, do tell me, Freddie. Oh, yes, Freddie. And he goes, the idea of shooting The Elephant Man in black and white, because, black and white, we associate that with older photography and the Victorian and this, that, and the other. And what was behind your decision to render this world in black and white in this way? Do tell. And Freddie Francis said, well, David Lynch was a new director, and Mel Brooks was a shrewd producer, and he was going to take a chance on him. He loved the story. And he said, but you know what? Let's shoot this on short ends, which was leftover film stock, because it's cheaper. And black and white, we can get loads of black and white, and it works for it. So let's shoot it on that. I'm not gonna risk a lot of expensive footage on this thing, which may or may not work. And the film students went, oh. they were waiting for this big artistic response from him. And he goes, well, it was more practical and it was cheap. And yeah, it kind of worked for it. So you could see all the people, oh. But I love that. It's, once again, it's another element of the illusion. It gives film students lots to write dissertations on. But sometimes it's just happy accidents. And you go, yeah, and it does look good for black and white, because people think, ooh, old fashioned. And you can never really tell what's going on in someone's head. So once again, that illusion and those lovely little ironies in there are great fun. And I love having those experiences. I like creating that stuff for people as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's the true magic trick, isn't it? Is that people feel there's more going on than there always is. But yeah, absolutely.
So all storytelling is an illusion, obviously, unless it's happening and you say, "Guess what just happened to me?" It's all an illusion, and so I don't have any problem in saying I'm creating an illusion for you, because in film, the very fact that you're watching a linear story is an illusion, because these are all obviously short sequences filmed out of order by people who haven't had these experiences, who are reading it off. So the whole thing is an illusion. The sense of a narrative going along, this happens and then this happens. All of that's an illusion. That you don't realize how many people are standing outside the frame just going, sucking their guts in and go, cut, okay, and I'll get back on with drilling and doing the work. It's an illusion, but it's a fantastic illusion. When it works really well, it's magic. And you can create so much more than what went into it in people's minds, because their minds are now using that as this Lego set to build this entire world. That's a tremendous challenge, and it's a tremendous responsibility when you take on a job to try to make sure you do everything within your power to maintain whatever collective illusion has been decided that wants to be put forward. So every project is creative in that way, and every project has an illusion that has to be maintained. So I can get into anything. That's the problem. It's very easy to get into anything. You go, this would be challenging on this level. And then you go off and you realize you are neglecting 99% of the rest of your life.
Well, Tom, I'm sure we could keep talking about the magic and the illusion and 40K for forever.
I can keep talking for Britain and the States. It's a family trait. It's somebody once said about me, the difference between Tom and the M6, you can turn off the M6.
Well, I appreciate you sharing some of these stories and talking us through some of that stuff, because it's been absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much, Tom.
I'm glad it give you some stuff to have a giggle about and to think about. Thanks for asking the questions. It's nice to be asked about this stuff.
Good, I'm glad. Enormous thanks to Tom for joining me to chat about such a moment in so many fans' collective consciousness. I have huge nostalgia for the Inquisitor movie. I absolutely love it, and I am so appreciative both for the creation of that film and for Tom's time to chat to me. So thank you, Tom. If you would like to support my work as a Warhammer historian, exploring the origins and evolutions of Games Workshop's greatest games, and speaking to the people who made them, then you can do so by checking out the link in the description that will take you to my Patreon, where you will get early and exclusive content and lots of other fun stuff as well. Every little helps, and I am greatly appreciative of any support that you can offer. Thank you once again to Tom. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.